I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Capella University is rethinking higher education. With its game-changing FlexPath learning format, you can earn your degree on your schedule and fit your education seamlessly into your life. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network. Today on the James Altucher Show.
I think I, in general, need to improve on my boundaries with toxic people. I've gotten better at it, but again, it's like a spectrum. And so maybe I'm like 8/10 of the way there, and I just want to keep improving.
You have an itch and you want to scratch it, essentially.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm careful too. You know, we all have the ability to be toxic to other people. So I'm mindful too. Like, I'm mindful, look, I just think it's like the expression, like, if you can't change the people around you, change the people around you, and
that's a great quote.
I try and be an idealist. I think it was Lao Tzu. When you are in love, you feel courage. And when you feel loved, you feel strength. You feel like, wow, I have support. I have somebody who has my back. And it's not conditional. And then there's that time where it doesn't work. And that's life sometimes. And then you have to just cut your losses from them, right?
And that's the hard part, and that's the discipline. But I think I think that's the way you choose yourself. So as they say,
brilliant.
As the kids say these days.
Thanks for not being toxic.
Maybe sometimes I am.
No.
All right, so Steve and I are doing another one of our podcasts about questions people are asking from Twitter. A lot of people are asking, how do you know who the toxic people are in your life? How do you know if you're toxic? And how do you avoid the toxic people in your life? And by coincidence, our good podcast friend, I don't know if you saw this, Steve, today, I think, good podcast friend, Amy Morin, who's been on this podcast like 6 times, she wrote an article, The One Type of Person Mentally Strong People Avoid, which is how do you also avoid what she calls energy vampires, which are not the exact same thing as toxic people, but there's an overlap. And so we could take a look at that. And there was something else. Oh, I found this interesting article about how narcissists are not what you think. Because I feel like everybody who's in a breakup ever says the other person's, oh, she was just a narcissist, he was just a narcissist. You would think the entire planet was filled with narcissists. So I wanted to find out what the actual statistics are. So I looked that up. All right, toxic people. So again, I feel like this has been a buzzword lately. Like, everybody's toxic, everybody's a narcissist. And I do think, and I've seen it in my own life, and I'm sure you've seen it in yours. Like, if you're, there's that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you have around you. And if the people you have around you are all, let's say, alcoholics and drug addicts and criminals, or are all negative, or they're always putting you down, then you're probably not going to be a great success in life. We bring
Yes.
this up in our podcast with Mike Massimino, the astronaut. He, after he was first rejected from being an astronaut, he got his PhD at MIT. And in one of his classes, there was like 9 people in the class, and he said 6 of them ended up going
Yeah.
to outer space. And that's a perfect example of that. You're the average of the 5 people around you. Like if he was just hanging out in a bar in Boston, he would never be able to say, it's really funny, 6 of the people hanging out at this bar went into outer space.
Absolutely. I mean, part of it, I think I've heard the phrase, and I don't want to not attribute it to the person or misattribute it, but I've heard the idea of like a genius, right? Like you're in a scene of all these geniuses around, where like, hey, it cultivates, in the art world, which you know better than I do.
Not
The
really.
sports world, obviously, I know a lot more than you do, but can't even a turtle looks fast moving past a rock. But but I think that yeah, but I think there is something to be right where like this a lot. Like,
Well, look like in the literary world, for instance. So in the 1950s, there was no beat literary movement, but if you think about all the when I mentioned them in a second, they're all famous names. When you think of the beat movement of writers, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, William S. Burroughs, and then there were some other fringe artists
Yeah.
and writers like Lucian Carr and other people. They all had one thing in common: they were best friends at Columbia University.
Yeah.
Well, and William S. Burroughs didn't even go to Columbia; he just like hung
Yeah.
out around there, like an older guy hanging out with these little kids. And but they all kind of, I think, if they had not sort of developed that scene, none of them would have published any
Yeah.
books. Like Allen Ginsberg helped all of them edit their books. He even flew to Morocco and pieced together William S. Burroughs' pages off the floor and put them into a book form and got it published, and it became a famous book, Naked Lunch. So all these, and then if you look in the art world, I think it was Jasper Johns, Robert Rauschenberg, were living together.
Yeah.
I think in their building there was other famous artists. Leo Castelli would come over and say, "Oh, you guys are great," and then he was the one who promoted their artwork. So scenes do develop as a group.
Yeah.
Success is part your talent and skill and part your ability to network with others. I think that's pretty clear, because there's probably artists who were just as skilled, but they lived in Cleveland and not near the galleries of New York, and so they didn't get as famous.
Yeah, I think Brian Koppelman talked about how if you want somebody to read your work, rather than get an agent, get another writer to recommend you, right? You're very generous with a lot of people, right?
Yeah, well, and we do that all the time. We get people on,
Yeah.
help our friends who are in the podcast business, and
And
get
it
them
means
guests.
more for one of us to recommend it to somebody else than
Well, the
somebody
more
else.
opportunities you have to make yourself part of a scene,
Yeah,
since being in a scene, as we've been describing it, is critical to success. It pays long term to do everything you can to be part of a scene. So for us, for instance, let's say in the podcast world,
Yeah.
we are happy to recommend our own guests to go on to other podcasts and share the wealth and so on. And,
Yeah.
and we've done that frequently. Or we'll let other podcasters
Yeah,
advertise on our podcast and so on. But this all brings down to toxic people. Obviously, there's only so many slots, like room, spaces open for people in your life, and there's your spouse or romantic partners, then there's your close friends, then there's your work acquaintances and other acquaintances, and if you have any negative people, that could take up a huge amount of your thoughts. Like I could say
Yeah.
just this past week, somebody did bothered me enough. They were like rude to me in a way that surprised me, and it was a once previously close friend, and I just was like obsessively thinking, why did this person do that? And just even that one day, it takes up, like, let's say 20 to 40% of your thinking if
Yeah.
you obsessively think about it. Like being around toxic people at some point, it's like somebody working on a beehive. Even if they're wearing all the masks, at some point the bees will sting you.
yeah. No, I think obvious. Yeah, and that was one of the reasons why I thought this was a very constructive topic for us, because even just speaking to different friends of mine about this, everybody has toxic people in their lives, and everybody has toxic relationships, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that person may or may not be toxic, quote unquote, or a narcissist, but it's not good for you, right? And I think as I've gotten older, rather than be too judgmental about people or wind up, it's kind of like the expression, you don't get clean rolling around in the mud, you get clean by getting out of it. And you have to learn who to cut out of your life, but it's on us to extricate ourselves from people
but
like
it's
that
hard
or
'cause,
deal with it.
Like people will bring
Yeah.
up, yes, I think the solution is cut people out of your life, but that
Yeah.
sometimes is too extreme.
Yeah.
And sometimes also you can't cut people out of your life. So if someone's a boss or
Yeah, absolutely.
it's a little more difficult if they're a family member. And by the way, the toxic people are never kind of the random neighbor
Yeah.
down the street. It's always the people who are somewhat close to you. That's
Yeah.
how they're inside. No one's toxic in a vacuum. Like they're toxic because they're
Yeah.
near you and doing things that are
And
bringing you down.
And I think what I hope to do today and what I'm thrilled to be with you in general is I want people to get value out of this. I want people to either get, information, affirmation and say, oh yeah, this might help me deal with it, because you've had to deal with it. We all have had to deal with it. But yeah, I listened to, psychologists talk about how, I'm not a psychologist, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn last night. But I think that
Wait, I don't get the joke.
Holiday Inn Express, there was a commercial, which it was a famous commercial. We're just talking about the benefits of staying at a Holiday Inn Express.
What does that have to do with a psychologist?
Because they would be like, I'm not a doctor, but I did stay at the idea that if you stay at Holiday Inn, you get a great night's sleep, then you could do anything.
I see.
That's what you read.
All right.
Either way. Joke's not funny if I have to explain it. So anyway, but they were just talking about toxic people. It's not, you don't choose them as much as they choose you. You have certain characteristics. You're kind, you're vulnerable, you're a people pleaser. And those people kind of subconsciously are attracted to you and that they can manipulate you.
Well, and I think that's one direction we
Yeah.
can go here,
Yeah.
which is we can outline the list of
Yeah.
toxic people, which
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
more than happy to do. But there's also what you just brought up were traps that get you stuck
Yeah.
to toxic people. I think a lot of times, again, I think a common refrain, I see this all the time with romantic breakups. Both sides will say, ugh, the other
Yeah.
side was
Yeah, sure.
was a narcissist or toxic or whatever. But I think but you can't just blame the other side. It's there's some 50-50 happening here.
Oh, for
and that's
sure.
these traps that are just as toxic that like for me, for instance, I think I have a hard time setting boundaries
Yeah.
with people who might be toxic. Like if
Yeah.
someone was or is a friend, and then suddenly I'm feeling negative all the time when I'm around them, or they're putting me down, or if they're rude to me, like I was thinking about this person last week, I have a hard time putting up boundaries, saying, okay, well, that person's no good. I need to distance myself. And so I think
Yeah.
an inability to put boundaries, which is caused for whatever reason, I don't know, is often a trap.
Well, I think one of the things I think is instructive too is when you wrote the best-selling book with a underwhelming subtitle about called Choose Yourself, but it just brings us to the whole idea that we do have choices, right? We always have a lot of choices, and you have a lot of choices in how you might deal with that person. And I heard somebody characterize a term called when you deal with people. Okay, fine. Maybe you don't want to confront them directly, but she called it the gray rock theory, where if you talk to people. And I've learned to do that with people. I've had some people in my life where if you tell them something, you're reluctant to share things with them because they're not listening oh, good for you. They're either jealous or judgmental, or they want you to take some of what you have. And that's not healthy if you feel that way about people. So then I'm just, how do you catch a fish when its mouth is open? So I'm very blunt. You keep it, hey, the weather's really nice. Or, hey, did you catch the game last night? I'm not... If I share things about people, then a lot of these people are looking to take rather than make it a win-win.
So that's one type of let's call that the first type of toxic person we'll identify is the one that you tell them something and they're your friend, but their instant reaction you sense is that they don't like the good news. They don't like the fact that you're having good news, and maybe they're not having good news in their life. If they were having good news, who knows how they would be. But people show themselves more when they're kind of
Absolutely.
going.
Yeah.
I actually, it's funny. I was about to say people show themselves more when they're going down, and then they can get jealous or angry inappropriately or whatever. But also they show themselves when they're going up and they start blowing you off. So in
Yeah,
both directions, if they're in
absolutely.
movement, it
Yes.
seems
Oh,
like people
interesting.
start to
Yeah.
reveal themselves. But okay, so one type of toxic person is the type of person who will get jealous or change their reactions to you or change their actions to you if you suddenly are on your way up and you have good news and you're sharing them in a positive way. Even if you're helpful to them, they don't like it.
Yeah. Listen, I'm careful too. Again, like we all have the ability to be toxic to other people. So I'm mindful too. Like I'm mindful, look, we could talk about all the hazards of social media where all you people see is your highlight reels and you don't see their behind the scenes. So I'm careful about when I interact with friends. I remember, I'll stay on brand and provide a quote, but I think, immature people seek congratulations and successful people self-congratulate. I remember hearing Jim Rohn say that. So like, I'm careful. So you're right. Like you do all these amazing things and maybe some people aren't that happy for you. Maybe that triggers jealousy in them. Now it's up to us to find the 5 people around us who are happy for you,
Right,
who are
so-
like, that's amazing, James, like you did this, or hey, you wrote this book, or you pitched this TV show, or you did this comedy thing, or
But
those are the people you want to be around.
Right, and so like the one thing is you can't, like, let's say you sense someone's not happy when you have good news. You don't really know. You can't. It's not easy to just say, okay, they're in that bucket. It's just you observe. You gotta have a
Yeah.
data point that they might be toxic, and you start to act accordingly. Like maybe you shift direction in terms of
Yeah.
how much time you spend with them. Like instead of upset, you can't ask the question why. Like you can't figure them out because
Yeah,
it's complicated. Like there might not be one reason, and they're never going to tell you. Like some people say, oh, you should sit down and
Yeah.
talk to the person and figure this out. You were good friends, but sometimes you can't figure it out. Sometimes you can't talk to them. Sometimes you just have to distance yourself.
well, it's like in literature. The villain doesn't think he or she is the villain. The villain, that's who they are. That's what they do. And I think we have to think about, okay, what are we going to get from that interaction, from that person? And, and that is part of, the different types of toxic people. I was read with interest people talking about like narcissists, and they said narcissists seek control, power, admiration, attention, all of these things from you. And so they want that kind of control over you and power. And, it's, in all these different terms about toxic people where they'll gaslight you or, invalidate the way you're feeling. And I think sometimes we have to have confidence in ourselves to say, you know what? I don't know why you did what you did, but I know how it made me feel. I don't want to feel that way. And if I have a choice, and we all have choices, I'd rather be with somebody who's really supportive for me, really happy for me when I accomplish things. Doesn't have to put you down in a certain way and treats you, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest. To get meta, even today, like we were like, hey, let's talk about this. And I shared with you everything I had so that, it's like, so that I'm not trying to outshine people. It's just, if it's Vidal Sassoon, if you don't look good, I don't look good. Like we want to make sure that we both succeed, right? Like it's a win-win.
So what is a narcissist? Since it is the word
I think
used
a
all the time.
narcissist obviously comes from, mythology where somebody loved the sight of their own reflection so much that they were just, that it actually too much, that they looked in the water and they drowned, so it's obviously somebody who has more than a, self-esteem. But I think narcissists are obviously really insecure people, and people called our president that, or a lot of people in politicians, who are politicians that. But I think a narcissist, again, is somebody who wants attention all the time, admiration, control,
We'll tend to manipulate without
Yeah.
thinking of the feelings of others.
Yeah, yes, for sure. They want to be the center of attention. They want you to admire them. And, look.
But I'll just add, just from
Yeah,
what
for sure.
I've been looking at, there's a spectrum. So the way they actually diagnose narcissistic personality disorder is there's a test to figure out your narcissistic personality inventory, and it's ranked then from 0 to 40. Everybody has a rank on
Yeah.
this continuum, and most people are somewhere around 20 or the high teens, and a high rank, like let's say between 35 and 40, 40 being the highest,
Yeah.
kind of gives you this the diagnosis. Whether
Sure.
that's a BS thing or not, I don't know, but that's how they do it for. That's how psychiatrists and psychologists supposedly do it.
Yeah.
So
And
so I'm
what's yours?
so I don't know. So I guess
Sure,
what I'm
it's
saying though is that
a 7.
I'm wondering if people could be
Oh.
not narcissists in general, but also someone could be a narcissist just towards you,
Oh,
or you could
interesting.
be a narcissist just towards someone else. I wonder if sometimes your narcissistic tendencies could come out more with some people than others.
I imagine that's I think so. Right. Yeah. I think there could be certain look, I also believe that they're toxic people, they're toxic environments, right? If you were somebody who was prone to drinking, obviously you don't want to be at a bar, or prone to gambling, you don't want to be in Las Vegas, or any number of things. And so there are toxic environments and there are limiting environments in people. So I do think, again, like certain environments people might not be a good fit, with you. And so, and they might not bring out the best in you. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, a negative kind of perception of them. But yeah, I think.
Well, so who else? What other category would you say you've experienced in your life as a toxic person?
I think there's somebody who's always the victim. I find that, I find that type of person who it's a form of manipulation where regardless of what happens, there's never going to be a level playing field. You're always going to feel like, hey, they deserve more concern and consideration and deference because they're going through something.
All right, so this is a complicated one because obviously they're trying to evoke sympathy in you.
Yes.
And you feel bad if you're not sympathetic. And yet, if you're going to protect yourself, it's the same technique. You have to somehow put up boundaries and pull away right when the person seems like they're having their biggest problems.
I think it's a question like with anybody, it's just degrees, right? Like it's, I think of same way somebody is happier with a lot less than what you have. Somebody complains a lot more with certain things than other people do. And I think, Rabbi Harold Kushner, I remember, wrote How Good You Have to Be. And I think like with people, like I think you kind of know, right? Like when enough is enough. Like that, after a while, it's like that person's concerns always are going to supersede yours because for whatever reason they have certain issues. And then you imagine like, and you.
Why do you think someone becomes the victim? Like maybe they didn't get enough attention when they were younger, and it's a way to get attention, or they don't have confidence in their positive attributes that they can get attention that way. So they use negative attributes to get attention or manipulate or whatever.
I think it's both. Yeah, I think it's definitely all the above.
And it probably usually works. Probably does get sympathy a lot of the time.
Yeah, and it's like, listen, it's like something that we talk about, and I want us to be mindful as podcasters and people who are trying to positively influence other people. You have people's trust and attention for so long. You have people's trust and attention because they know they're going to learn something from you. They know you have knowledge that other people don't have, and good intentions, and they know you practice what you preach. When people meet you, you're a certain way, and you're just as curious off air as you are on air, or decent to people, so that you have people's trust and attention. And I think, like with us, when you have people in your personal life, they'll have your trust and attention for only so much time, and if that person isn't there for you when you need them, or it's a one-way street, then after a while, obviously, it's an old proverb, like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. And so I think, like Martin Luther King said, no man could ride you unless your back is bent. Like you have to eventually say, hey, I deserve this life if I'm tolerating it. And you can say, okay, I'm sorry you're going through all this, but so are other people,
Well, so two things on that. One is, so we've had on several people on the podcast who are experts in influence and persuasion. So, for instance, Robert Cialdini, who wrote the classic book Influence, or Chris Voss, who is the FBI's hostage negotiator, or even Scott Adams, who wrote a book on all the influence techniques used in the recent presidential or the last presidential campaign. And interestingly, in none of their books and nothing ever any of them has ever said you get influenced by trying to evoke sympathy.
Oh,
So none of Robert
interesting.
Cialdini's influence techniques said, oh, you should pretend to be having problems to influence people. Never that
interesting.
technique does
Yeah.
not work. So these people who are trying to use that technique that starts to transform into toxic behavior, it's a technique that ultimately doesn't work for the reasons you just said. Like you can't,
Yeah.
ultimately you're going to find yourself distancing yourself from the person. And no matter how close you were previously,
Yeah.
I mean, some people don't distance themselves and then they're not putting up enough boundaries. But I think you have to distance yourself just to save yourself because,
Yeah.
it's the whole cliche of life is short. But if you spend,
Yeah.
a third of your day listening to someone's problems or spending time with someone who's constantly just complaining about people and complaining to you, and if you tell them, oh no, you can do this, it could be better if you do this, and then they argue with you on that, they argue with you on every suggestion you have, then whether you're right or wrong, maybe their problems are real, but it's still not helping you if you're not able to communicate with them at all.
Yeah, and listen, I think I'm mindful of the people who are listening at home and they have a job. And when I worked at a company, I didn't love every person that I worked at and worked
so what
with.
would you do then? Like, let's say you had a colleague who you worked with every day, but was always complaining, gossiping, negative, and if they're putting other people down, that to those other people they're putting you down. And let's say there's a person you never feel good, like they always kind of disagree with you in a meeting or tell you to do things that are, of course you'll do them, but like, why is this person always telling you to do this thing?
Yeah, no, I felt like, and I felt fortunate once I became to the Choose Yourself universe with you. I felt fortunate because I could choose, I had more of a choice. Okay, but when I didn't, I was like, Calgon, take me away. But I felt like I tried to make the most of that situation. And I felt like, if you can't change something, like Maya Angelou said, change your attitude. So if I was going to be around people like that, no, I didn't think it was great. I didn't think that they were really inspiring people to be around. And I felt like, they had a vision of things that was different from mine. And, if I'm charitable, I'll say, okay, it's not for me. And if I'm less charitable, I'll say, like, that's just a wrong kind of mindset, and
but again, what would you do? Like, if you had to see them,
I would do my best to say, take them warts and all, and then if I felt it was a cancer, then I'd have to remove it. Like, I'd have to just if I was sitting across from them and, and there were times where I had colleagues where I felt like I never liked somebody else that much in a job where I would talk to them all the time or disregard the job that you were paid to be there. And I took it like a privilege and a responsibility. But if I was with them, I would try and pull them aside and appeal to their better nature and say, hey, don't you want to do this? Like, hey, instead of being chatty patty, don't you think you want to pursue this story? Wouldn't it be great if we did this? And
what if they're like, no, I don't think
and then
it's
after a while, then you're like, okay, they're not for me, and then I'll put my headphones on and I'm like, you had your chance, like,
I think though also, like, you have to switch jobs.
Oh, me, 100%. Yeah. No, I think you want to be at a place worthy of your talents. You want to be at a place where people push you. Kamal Ravikant made a very good point where he said, when he went to Silicon Valley from Rochester, New York, he said, if you want to be fit, you don't hang around 10 chubby people who keep telling you why they're chubby. You go to...
This is why Kamal stopped hanging around with us.
Yeah, exactly. But I think Kamal is a brilliant guy, and he just said, if you want to be fit, you go with the fittest people in the world. Maybe you hang out with Olympians or people who push you and make you feel better, that you have to rise up to their standard rather than be at sea level and bitch and moan about everybody else. And that is toxic. It's a toxic environment. And maybe it's a toxic environment for them. But
I think it's hard for people to say, well, I can't just get up and quit my job. Like, look, I had to, I saw you at Good Day New York. I had to convince you to jump ship.
Oh,
no, and I'm not saying they were bad. I'm not saying those people were bad.
No, I was like, I think that you get into a rut. I think you say it better than I can and Choose Yourself. where you talked about like people are afraid. Like you had that whole metaphor about like going up on above, ground and you seeing all these people there. I think, yes, there are things that hold you back, and again, bring back Amy Moore and you're afraid of change. You give other people their power by obsessing over them, or you're afraid to take risks. I think I had known that for a certain while, but no, I think when I had met you the second time, I knew like, wow, this is the kind of person I wanted to be with. And you know what? I'll say this again. Like when we met to talk about this, I just liked how you were very, and this is another, you were very process oriented, and I'm pleased to say that everything we talked about is proven true, where you said, oh, you go on Good Morning New York. You didn't even know the name of the show, but like you only get 3 minutes. And here, when we had met, people came up to you and they said you changed their lives and you helped them. And that's why you were motivated to do it. I think the people you don't want to be around, to some degree are toxic or outcome-oriented people. People who just want to be famous. People are doing it for a reason.
Let's talk
people
about that
who
category.
meet me, by the way, or you, and I was vulnerable to it, that have a hidden agenda, that they would meet with you and they talk about this in psychological terms, love bombs or something. Like they befriend you and they appeal to your vanity or your insecurity. And again, that's where those people choose you, and they will, and they really have an agenda. They want to be friends with you because, you could help them.
Well,
you have
and-
influence
and-
on TV or whatever.
And by the way, what you said about being mindful earlier, it's important. Like I've certainly been that person in the past. So
Yeah.
let's
Yeah, for
say
sure. Me
let's say
too.
I was running a hedge fund and I wanted to raise money.
Yeah.
Or let's say I was running an ad agency and I wanted a client. Of course, if that person said, "Hey, come to our weekend house for the weekend and we'll discuss," and I'd pack up the family, the kids, everything.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to do was go to like a beach
Yeah.
house and go
Yeah.
in the ocean. I hate that. And but there I would be like, oh, smiling and like
Sure.
friendly. So I was, I would do things in order to try to stay in business and get their business. And often I even felt like, oh, I hate this. Like I feel like all these people now are my friends. I don't want to be my friends.
Yeah. I think I would say a couple things like that. Like, and I should acknowledge the contributions of Linda Papadopoulos, a former guest, and Tom Frank, our friend, because again, they were nice enough to offer their thoughts on toxic people. And Tom is in Hollywood, and he talked about, hey, what's here in Hollywood? And narcissists are usually rife over there. And so you have to deal with them over there. And a lot of these people, certainly in the Me Too movement, found themselves compromising their beliefs because, well, I don't want to, have lunch, or even worse with this, fat slob movie studio chief who's boorish and, and sexist and worse, but I kind of have to. And like, think sometimes you do feel like that environment, like when you're in a big environment where there's a lot of other people around you, you feel like I better do it, I have no choice. And obviously you have choices. And I think as you get older and more experienced and you learn the consequences of them, you say like, you know what, that's not for me.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players, and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his. You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply. For me, that's what happened. Like, that ad agency business, I ultimately sold and got out of that business. And the hedge fund business, I just hated so much the process of raising money. It felt like prostitution somehow. And I just so I was the toxic person, or I was a toxic person dealing with another toxic person who was taking their power and lording it over me in exchange for my friendship. And so who knows which directions it was going. But I ultimately couldn't stay in that business to be mentally healthy. I was getting so depressed. To be mentally healthy, I had to remove myself from that. And that's basically when I started writing more and I started doing more activities that I enjoyed and being more process oriented, like focusing on getting to be a better writer every day, for instance. That got me a completely different audience, a completely different sources of income, a different career, and so on. And I know that's happened to a lot of our podcast guests, for instance.
Yeah, I think it's great. No, I think look, hopefully,
But I just sorry to
yeah,
interrupt. Sometimes though, when I see it in reverse, when someone's kind of being nice to me in order to get some
absolutely.
advantage, and I'm usually very generous back. I don't demand friendship in order to give something. So I hope I'm not like the other side. But then when someone kind of, let's say, completely ghosts after they get what they want, then I do feel like, oh, what did I do something, or why did this happen? Like I get upset, and you can't. And it's one of those things, and where you have to just move forward, and you can't ask why.
Yeah, I've
Why
tried.
has no answer ever.
Yeah, and I've tried to help you, or like Matt, you help me also with that in that kind of relationship. Yeah, it's just look, some of these people that were around, and I think like I feel better about it. Like a lot of people got, there's a million reasons why people are toxic to you or not helpful or not beneficial. And it's not just, kissing up and kicking down or like being so short-sighted. People, I think about it a lot. I mean, you had a great interview with Richard Branson. He's very simply said, people want to be around people who are positive. People want to be around people who look for the best in other people. People want to be around people who, praise you. And somebody actually corrected me, a psychologist said, you don't need to be around people who praise you. You need to be around people who support you, And so, yeah, I think it's the old, like, when people show you who they are, believe them. Like, and that's also, like, we see this a lot. Like, to be honest with you, and I'll tell you, anybody listening, like, people think they want to be successful. And they think that, and they're doing the stuff that's not the successful people wouldn't do that.
Right,
Like,
so
they would follow up. They would,
Let's look at that
reciprocate.
category for a second, because
Yeah.
it's almost like the topic of the podcast over the past 500 episodes.
Yeah.
We talk to peak performers. So they're not a peak performer because they're the world champion of something, or they won the gold medal of something, or they wrote the best-selling book. They're peak performers because for 20 years prior to that, they focused on process and getting better and facing lots of disappointments. You're not going to be happy every step of the way towards achieving the gold medal. 99% of the time, you're going to fail, you're going to lose the race, you're going to lose the game, the sport, the deal, the whatever. And you figure what happens is you get better and better at getting around that. So that's process. People who every day just focus today on how can I improve a little bit more in the direction I'm going? I might swerve directions, I don't know, but I'm going to just try to improve in whatever direction I need to go. Whereas I've seen a lot of people be the complete opposite, and I find these people to be toxic, at least when they're in my life, is let's say I'm just going to make it up. I can't think of let's say they want to get a PhD and the PhD gets rejected, or they write a whole book and the book gets rejected everywhere, and they get depressed for 6 straight months and are constantly saying, I just got my book rejected, I can't deal with this right now. And so they're just goal oriented. They're thinking like they had the one goal, it didn't happen, which is completely normal, as we've seen from the 500 successful people we've interviewed, and they won't hear it if you. I mean, it's not my role to say, hey, focus on process instead of outcome, but they just don't even understand what that means. They literally are just about the fame or the outcome or the money, and that will, it's almost like money doesn't solve your problems, process solves your problems, and they don't get that at all.
Yeah, I think about that a lot.
And you have to remove yourselves from them too.
You have to remove yourself with people. And again, I telling you, if you got it, you spot it. I was there and for a long time, and you didn't feel like you had that much of a choice. Like, there are a lot of people who don't feel like you have a choice. And I think sometimes you have to step back and really work on just giving yourself more and more choices. And that's kind of how a little by little becomes a lot. Like, you get a little bit of freedom, and then you have some more time, or you make a little bit of money, then you could save it away. And, you have a part-time job. I'm excited for your book, The Side Hustle Bible, where people have a side hustle, or you have a front burner, like Tom Frank says, and a back burner, and you have, you could be waitressing and hoping to be a comedian, or it's doing all different kinds of things. But like you gradually you'll get better at comedy and maybe have more time. We've seen this countless times with people, and we did a great interview with Sebastian Maniscalco at Four Seasons where he used to work. But I do think that I didn't feel like I had as much of a choice. You're in TV. You're competing with all these other people. You have fear of missing something. You have
when you're in a corporation, you're in this artificial hierarchy, right? So you're every day going into work, into essentially like a palace,
right?
This big building where at the top might be the CEO and at the bottom is the mailroom, kind of a cliche. And you are trying to move to the top because it's a natural instinct. It's a tribal instinct. You want to be the top of the hierarchy. You want to keep getting promoted, and because all the people around you, the 5 people around you who are just in the cubicles around you, they're looking at promotions or demotions as signs of status or destatusing. And again, it's an artificial hierarchy. And if people get so disappointed, oh, this guy got the promotion instead of me. Well, what we see again from successful people in the corporate world, like when Beth Comstock came on, she was formerly vice chairman of GE.
Yeah.
Well, she didn't become the CEO of GE. Yeah. And all the other people at the top level who didn't become the CEO of GE, you didn't see them fall into depression. They all just went and became the CEOs of other companies.
Yeah.
They left and became the CEOs of other companies.
And that speaks to choice. But I think I think you can get into a funk and you could, perseverate and constantly be there and then not feel like you have a lot of choice. And I get it. Like you can work in these environments. And again, that if you're lucky enough when you see people, and again, it doesn't mean, I remember Kathy Ireland had said, don't be afraid to leave something good for something great. Like, and if you have a choice, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to, cast aspersions on that other person. You can be like, it's not for me. Like if I have a choice.
Right, I think that's the key phrase. It's not for me, or this person's not for me. Doesn't even have to focus on the toxicity. It's just we're going in different ways, and I have to be in a different place.
I think some people stay in your life for a reason, a season, a lifetime. But I think like now, I definitely I'm very, very mindful of every encounter we have. Like, how can this be a win-win? And I can look back, and it's, what was it, like all dysfunctional families are the same, and they're, all happy families are the same, and all dysfunctional families are different, as a Tolstoy, and I think that when you look back and you can think about toxic relationships, when people are toxic or negative or don't have your best interests at heart or don't think about it, you're in a corporate environment, they'll secretly go behind your back about things, or they're not open. And a good relationship is honest and open. If you're open about everything you do, I could look at it and say, you're not like those kids in high school say, oh, I hardly studied, and you studied 10 hours, and that kid over there is thinking, wow, I'm a moron. This guy doesn't even study. Like, to be honest with people and to be open, and you've done that with your struggles, and then it does ignite people to say like, wow, I can do that too. So that's a good environment, a good relationship where it's people are open and honest with each other and don't hold back and aren't secretly hiding stuff from you because they don't want to share with you. It's not a generous environment.
Right, like people often kind of think they have to protect their turf when the reality is if you open your turf up, it gets bigger.
Yeah, and I think so. Again, I remember, I think about, you've talked about this a lot where success leaves clues, and I've watch anybody who's really good at something, right? And they have a little bit of contempt for people who aren't that way, and I'm not, and I think I'll watch Kevin Durant, the basketball player, and he'll simply watch other players, and the guy will like foul him really hard, and he's not going to sit there and waste a lot of energy. And he said, that's not a basketball play. That's not a basketball player. They don't want to be champion. They don't want to be like at that. And so fine, if you don't want to, that's fine. Do your thing. But it's not for me. And I've talked about this before, and now I finally do feel like I can choose. Like we can choose. Like when we started, we would have certain people, and I said, that guy's fine, but every time he does something, he acts like he's giving us his kidney. And you said, Steve, we can choose ourselves, and that could be fine for somebody else. Hallelujah. Go to town with them, but it's not for me.
Yeah, and like one thing I would suggest to people is, and this was very good advice I got back in 1995. Every 2 years, if you're in a corporate job, every 2 years, just apply for some other job.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, it kind of avoids this problem of thinking too much in the hierarchy that you're in. Like, so you're not so obsessed with the next promotion because you realize there's an outside world. But it also helps you to see, the job market is a market like anything else. Price / salary is ruled by supply and demand. So if you put your resume out there every couple of years, you see what the demand is for you. You see what the supply of people like you are out there, and that's dependent on have you improved your skills or not. And then you see what possible salaries are out there for you. So you don't have to be so obsessed with the one salary you're making or the one job title you have or whatever, which is why people often make huge rises when they move horizontally in their industry instead of trying to move just vertically in their company.
Sure.
So that's one piece of advice. And the other one is not advice as much as a story. So one time I was business partners with somebody, and the relationship might have even started toxic, but it certainly became toxic. This person literally screamed at me repeatedly, on the phone, and accused me of all these things. And I decided, you know what? No one has yelled at me since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And and this person's even younger than me. Not that matters, but I don't want anybody yelling at me. And life is too short. So I actually never spoke to him again. Through an intermediary, I bought his shares, and it wasn't easy. It took about 8 months of work on my part to find someone to buy him out. And fine, I'm not saying he's a bad person. Maybe we just needed to go in different directions. I had a good result as a result of doing this, and had found good partners, and everything was fine. So you do have to take action. You can't fight the person. I never spoke to that person again. I never said to him, "You're wrong."
Yeah.
Because no one's going to say, "Oh, you're right, I'm wrong." Very few people will say that. You have to actually just take action on your own. You have to use the phrase "choose yourself."
No, but I think, like I said earlier, quoting myself, you don't get clean rolling around in the mud. You get clean, getting out of it. And I would say I want to pay you a compliment because, again, it's like Chase, the right relationship is everything, and you think
But it's so hard because the person who cuts me down, suddenly you feel this instinctive urge to win them back.
That is the idea of a toxic person.
Or to figure out what you did wrong.
Yes, but you feel like you need their validation. And look,
it's easy to say, okay, I'm going to leave.
Yes.
I'm going to ignore that person was wrong. I'm going to ignore them. But, maybe there was something that was right in what they were doing. So you have to train yourself to...
Yeah, it takes discipline, and you have to just... I think there was a Sheryl Crow song where she just talked about how it was hard at the beginning, and then it slowly but surely gets easier. And you have to, do that. I was going to say, I'm grateful to you because you knew that I had to like quotes, and, and you made me do things like that just to say, hey, not to... Steve, write a book on quotes. Do the Dov Steve. And that process helped me. And when I was preparing for this thing on brand, I remember sending you, don't make somebody a priority if you're only an option for them, if you have a choice. Or, don't
That's
set yourself,
a great quote.
Don't set yourself on fire to keep somebody else warm. And I thought they were very helpful to me.
Don't make someone a priority if you're only an option.
Yeah, and I think about that and okay, I've dealt with people like that, and you're kind of and before you would run around because, again, in your mind, you have a reason to do it. You think it's going to yield a certain outcome. That person might be promising you money. And to me, it doesn't work out. It doesn't, when you do something, again, in your book, you talked about when you do things you don't want to do. I don't have it committed to memory. We put it on the waiter's pads. But, you resent that person. And
ultimately, you're there choosing if you don't choose your own agenda, someone else is choosing it. And the result's not going to be as good for you.
Yeah.
And thinking about it in terms of the podcast, right? We, there are a lot of priorities for us. There are so many guests that I could say, if that potential guest says yes, that's a priority. But and obviously, let's say we wanted, Donald Trump or Barack Obama on the podcast, that would be a huge priority. And we're only an option. But to go along with your quote, we solve that problem by having we diversify our priorities.
Yeah.
So we don't need to have Barack Obama, we can have this person or these 1,000 people that we have made into a list,
Yeah.
and they'll all be equally good, or with a range,
Right.
but they'll all be really great guests that we legitimately want and would like to have. And then now because we've diversified so much, the priorities have been sort of demoted to options.
Yeah, yeah, there's that.
Or like in
Yeah.
a business, if you have
Yeah.
a big sales pipeline instead of just one, if you have a lot of people you're approaching for sales instead of just one, you've taken that priority and demoted them to an option when, so you leveled the playing field. So that's the way to kind of do
Absolutely,
what
but
you're
I will always try for those people that we always feel like we're good enough, and they'll
Yeah,
say
because the
yes.
process is we'll treat them we'll treat them like priorities, but the process is also we have many options. We'll treat many people like priorities.
Yeah, and look, again, when we had a guest here, and I think she remarked to us, "Oh, the people at our publishing company want to meet you, James and Steve." And I was like, "Well, why don't they just come here? Like they could have just seen us here. They would have met me. They would have, talked to us about other clients of theirs. They would have, seen the comedy club. You would have invited them to watch you do stand up, and." And you had initially said, "Well, Steve, maybe they're busy." And I'm like, maybe they're, if she were Jennifer Lopez, wouldn't they have been here for her? Shouldn't you treat her like that? And don't you want to be around somebody who thinks like that? And, and so, yes, I think there's something to be said, not just, not only on that author's point, but on those people over there. And that's why they're not further along.
Right, because I think even inaction is toxicity. I mean, people who do the bare minimum and don't think a little bit outside of the box to help the people around them, that by itself could be toxic for someone.
I'm grateful, that I have, I don't think that I'm under the same relentless gun of like TV and just that push, where there's breaking news stories and you don't feel you have as much control by the nature of that business, or you have a lot of other people around. And so I do have time now to mentor people, and I want to pick somebody worthy of my time, and I'll pick them. And, the old Frank Shamrock, Ryan Holiday talk about plus equal minus, where he fights guys his own level, trains with guys better than him, and coaches other people. And I'll look at them and I try and become the change I desire. Like I was with a lot of people where they're like, yeah, that's okay for you, to have this, but I want this, and there's a hierarchy over there. And, that's not what I want. I want them to say like, hey, which is why we were killing you about the subtitle, but I think here's why, like when we meet people, here's why you should do this. You're going to be, and I'll say, do this. You're going to be happier. You're going to have more choices. You're going to make more money. You're going to have more time with your family. Like I'll tell them that, like, I give them the carrot and the stick, and I'll say, dude, do this. But the difference is between now and before, like I'm not going to sit there and put my ladder up against the wrong wall. Like if I'm going to invest in them, I'm going to push them. And
all these things require certain discipline.
Yeah.
To stick with it, to step out when it's no longer being.
I talk about it. We're fortunate to have Stan Hoffman, who's managed 38 boxing champions here.
What's his name?
Stan Hoffman.
He's managed.
He's that cool dude in a loose mood. Stan's here, but no, Stan talks about it all the time, right? Like you can't take a plow horse and make him into a Clydesdale, right? Like we talk about it a lot. We're focused on selection rather than development. And so, okay.
That's a very good quote.
Like if we have people around us and they don't want it and they're not process oriented or don't see, like that's what appealed to me about you. Like you wanted to like be successful. You weren't just, you loved it for the sake of it. Like you were interested in whoever, like, I could name 100 different people and yes, your eyes were bigger than your stomach, but like you really were interested in that. You were interested. You were just curious and interested.
But again, it's process. It's not like
yes.
I said to you, I just want to be the biggest podcast in the world. Like regardless of once we're in a podcast, regardless of whether we get lots of downloads or no downloads, we still do the same job for each
when
guest.
You get up and do comedy, whether there's 3 people, 700, you perform the same, right? Like it's not that person over there can be that one person who sees you, and I think about that all the time. Like, we've had people come up and say, James really changed my life, or that book. And that's gratifying, right? Isn't that why we're doing this? Like,
Yeah, and so this all sort of also segues into a category which I think is not usually considered toxic, but I think it kind of is, which is if somebody's a hypocrite.
yeah, 100%.
So like, let's say someone is, I'm just gonna make something up. Let's say someone is super against climate change, but then I don't know, what would be
So if
hypocritical?
they're super against climate change and they'd ride in private jets,
Yeah.
yeah.
Or let's pick a different category. Let's say someone's a feminist,
yeah.
but their brother has just been accused of hashtag Me Too and something, and it's probably, the accusations are probably true, and then they I mean, you see this in the news. I don't know anybody personally like this, but
but I'll give an example. I mean, Adam Horovitz of the Beastie Boys, his dad Israel Horovitz was accused of it, and he was like, "Yeah, it's wrong."
My dad. I don't know the story. What happened?
Oh, his dad Israel Horovitz back, wrote "Park Your Car in Harvard Yard." One of the Beastie Boys. You probably did their website.
No, that's the one website.
And they're amazing artists, obviously the Beastie Boys. But like his dad was a well-known playwright, and he had incidents, which the Times reported, in the flurry of all the Me Too movement. And Adam Horovitz said, "Yeah, I know he's my dad, but I'm sure he did it, and it's despicable." And you have to have the courage to call balls and strikes, and to call him and to say, "Yeah, it hurts me to do this, but I'm going to tell the truth." And and just because you like somebody or whatever, you have to call it the way you see it and the way it is, and be intellectually honest.
It's like Dave Chappelle talks about this exact issue, because Bill Cosby was a hero to him, and he said everybody around him couldn't believe it when all these accusations about rape. It wasn't I shouldn't say just, but it wasn't like he was harassing them. He was like knocking them out and then raping them, and then it was just too much. Like he said, just think, if Bill Cosby had done 40 less rapes, he still would have raped 20 people. It's too much. It's like, there was no way around it. Like, he just had to say he's not a good guy.
I think that we all have to be careful of our own biases and not be hypocritical. Again,
I think that's very hard for people.
I love Chris Rock with Heat of a Thousand Suns. I mean, I think he's a brilliant guy. But remember when he said, I always liked where he said, if Anita Hill with Clarence Thomas, if he looked like Denzel Washington, she'd be like, "Denzel, you nasty." And there are people who had somebody in their political party was a certain way, and then they turn the other, they overlook it if that person's like that. And I think we all have to look at it and say, "Hey, that's wrong." I was a news person. I don't know how much MSNBC, who would have run the Jussie Smollett alleged hoax all day, long, if it was legitimate, if people actually beat him up and said MAGA, country, even though 10 degrees below zero, and it was the place was 88% Trump supporters. But if assuming that was true, you would have heard it all about the time, about the deleterious effects of the rhetoric that's out there. And so if the converse happened, maybe you should cover it. And I would say the same thing on the other side, if there's stuff that doesn't reflect well on you.
So if a person, if you see that in a person.
Yes, if you see it in a person, I think it's
another example where it's a data point where you're like, okay, maybe this is not the person who's going to, be the 5 people around me.
Yeah. And,
and I think I'm seeing in the email, your friend Tom, he sort of says it direct. You have to eliminate them from your orbit in a passive-aggressive manner, which I agree with. Like, passive-aggressive sounds bad. Like,
that's what he was saying. Yeah, he was saying that,
But at the same time, you can't just be aggressive, because that has no effect. And if you're passive, you're letting them still invade your boundaries. You have to kind of be passive-aggressive.
Well, that's what I alluded to before. It seemed like that was what that gray rock theory is, where you just be bland. Like, if I see somebody that is like that, or I know if I bring up stuff to them, okay, and maybe, I think that's the lesser of two evils, is to just kind of be careful, keep it general, keep it moving. And they're not gonna, again, Chris Rock, where he said, when Siegfried and Roy were attacked, and and he's, if the tiger went crazy. And he goes, that tiger didn't go crazy. That tiger went tiger. Like, that's who these people are. So, like, it's going to be hard for you to change them.
And Linda Papadopoulos,
Yeah.
who's she's a psychiatrist. I forget.
She's a psychologist.
Psychologist.
In
And
England.
she's been on the podcast, but this is how my memory is. And she was great on the podcast. She wrote types of toxic people. So I just want to read her list real quickly. And because we just talked about this one, incongruence between stated beliefs and actions. So that's sort of hypocrisy. Those who try to guilt you rather than genuinely trying to thrash out an issue. Those who compete to be the most offended. Competitive victimhood. Social climbers. People that are form over content. So you can say that's goal over process. People that expect you to read their minds and don't take ownership of what they need. So blame you if they don't get it. One-way traffickers, all take and no give. So we've seen a lot of that. People that lie to themselves about themselves and ask you to partake in that lie. What's an example of that? People that lie to themselves about themselves and ask you to partake in that lie.
Oh, interesting. Well, I just think there are people who just need affirmation so much. Didn't I do, an amazing job at comedy? No, I don't know.
Right. And so, and then if you say, you could have been better this way.
Yeah.
If they suddenly treat you badly for that, then that's.
But it
kind of
brings us
toxic
back
behavior.
to our point, though, too. When I counsel a friend who's at a certain job that I was in a similar situation, like, you have people's trust and attention. Like, I'll tell you, hey, that was a swing and a miss, dude. You know what I mean? Like, but you tried. Like, we'll get him next time, Tiger.
What? I kill it every time.
No, but you should, and I think, like, when you're not in good situations, that person doesn't care about you. And when you're in those situations where it's like, hey, sorry I was late, my mom is sick. The people who care about you are like, oh my God, if you don't betray their trust, like, if you are the victim all the time, after a while, if you could be that toxic person by going to that well too many times. But if the person cares about you, they're going to want you to do well. They care about you. Like, they want you to do well. So, like, I'm concerned about, like, and for me, like, sometimes I might have to say no to somebody, and that person was my friend, or, and I have to think beyond me and say, hey, is this good for us? And I'll be upfront and, and just try and handle it, in a certain way. And, like, you have to think about why. Like, why are you doing this? Are you afraid to say no? Are you doing it to please them? Are you doing it because you have your own agenda that's out extracurricular to what we're trying to do here, which is put the interesting guests to have interesting conversations, inspire people.
Which is okay if people have different agendas. I think, again, there's a positive way to do it and a negative way to do it. Like you said before, being open and transparent about it is usually the positive way to do it. And I think, to sum all this up, is that we've identified a bunch of toxic behaviors, but it's always sort of the same solution, which is to kind of make sure they're not, if you really are the 5 people, the average of the 5 people you bring into your life, the less toxicity in your life, probably the less toxic you will be. So sometimes people ask me, well, what if how do I know that I'm not the toxic one? Again, if you just look at the people around you, if on average they're not toxic, chances are you're probably avoiding toxicity. And I think that's the most important thing, is not necessarily to be happy, but if by eliminating the toxic people in your life, you simply become less toxic, which allows you to become more process-oriented, more productive, and then ultimately more successful.
Yeah, I think with a lot of situations, I think I try and idealize things, and you've said this, what would this be like if it's easy? Or what would it be like if this was a healthy relationship? Or what would this be like if this person really wanted you to do well? How would they act? And if they really wanted you to do well, they would push you. They would say, hey, in your case, Steve, I want you to write this book, do this, or get out of your comfort zone. It's not for you, it helps me. And I think that, that's what you want. And I think it's very true. Avoid people who make you fearful or sad. Avoid people who don't have your best interest at heart. And sometimes it takes you a while to realize that.
And it takes a long while. I've been guilty of it so many times with so many bosses and colleagues and friends. And it's guilty of it last week, just obsessing for one day on, why did this friend behave this way? It took me a while to sort of say, okay, well, that's just not a relationship I need in my life, as opposed to wondering over and over again why, even though I knew intellectually, don't ask why.
I just think it's like the expression, like, if you can't change the people around you, change the people around you. And after a while,
That's a great quote.
You can't change them. Like you can't. And so I've tried to do that, but I just think that, I try and be an idealist. Like you think in your personal relationships. Remember, like it says, like, I think it was Lao Tzu. When you are in love, you feel courage, and when you feel loved, you feel strength. And you think about the relationships you have.
Wait, when you're in love, you feel courage,
right? And
so, like for instance, if you ask the girl out or whatever, and
you feel courage, or if somebody wants to hit on your woman, then all of a sudden, you go from wimp to and
say it,
wimp to
pimp.
pimp. Yeah, we've already had a foul mouth podcast, so might as well keep it. And if you feel loved, you feel strength. You feel like, wow, I have support. I have somebody who has my back.
And I think that really propels.
And it's not conditional.
Success.
Yeah, and it's not conditional. And it's not, oh, if you do this, and those, again, so in my life now, like, I try and be around people who, and it's not, you can miss on certain people. And again, I think, like, we've all been wronged by people by being the way we are. And I've had this conversation with people, and 80 to 90% of the time, it leads you to really fruitful relationships and beautiful friendships and relationships with people. And then there's that time where it doesn't work, and that's life sometimes. And then you have to just cut your losses from them, right?
And that's the hard part, and that's the discipline. But I think I think that's the way you choose yourself. So as they say,
brilliant.
As the kids say these days. All right, so toxic people with Steve Cohen.
Yeah,
Not that
exactly.
he's toxic. What should our next topic be?
Why don't we put that out to the...
Yeah, actually, I'll go back to the Q&A that people ask, because we haven't really addressed a lot of the questions that people asked that one day. So we'll address everything.
Yep. Thank you very much,
Thanks
James.
so much, Steve.
Thanks for not being toxic.
Maybe sometimes I am.
No.
I think I need to be. I think I in general need to improve on my boundaries with toxic people. But I've gotten better at it. But again, it's like a spectrum, and so maybe I'm like 8/10 of the way there, and I want to be. I just want to keep improving.
You have an itch and you want to scratch it, essentially.
Yeah. I gotten better. I used to be really bad, and I've gotten better and better and better. And a lot of it involves, pulling away from people when they're no good for me. And a lot of it is training people. So if someone is talking to me on the phone and starts yelling, then I immediately say, okay, I have to go.
Do you think that people treat you as bad as you let them?
Yeah, I think people will treat you as bad as you let them. So if someone starts yelling at you on the phone and you say, okay, I have to go, you don't give a reason why, you just get off the phone.
Yeah.
And the next time you talk to them, you talk for 15 minutes and they start yelling at you, and then you say, okay, I have to go, and you keep doing that, eventually they'll stop yelling at you or they'll stop calling you.
Well, I was going to say, because I thought about that, because like if you have people who are only interested in you for external things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I do, or other people. And I remember like there was somebody that I worked with, and then somebody was like, oh, did you hear that blah, 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 that she's doing this right now? And I was kind of like, it takes discipline, but you have to be like, I don't care. You know what I mean? Like to me, it's like we've talked about like the idea of like hire slow and fire fast. And in my mind, that's fine. It's not a currency to me anymore, like what you're doing or who you know or all these external superficial things that had value in the previous incarnation in TV because you're like, who cares if you know all these people? Like who cares? Like, do you really care if you're Bill Cosby or Harvey Weinstein? Again, I'll bring it up to all of that thing over there. So I don't really care. You want to be around people who are decent people or fun to be with, who are happy for you and you do well. And we should try and be that way, right? You attract what you want by being what you want.
Yeah, it's all right. Let's basically the party's where we're at, and
yes,
everyone
100%.
else is invited.
Yes, thank you. I like that.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.